On a freezing December night, I opened my front door and found my daughter standing there with snow melting in her hair. My 3-year-old granddaughter was shaking so hard she couldn't even say hello. Emily looked at me with eyes I'd never seen before and whispered, "Dad, we don't have a home anymore." For a second, I honestly thought I'd heard her wrong. The wind pushed another wave of snow across my porch. Lily buried her face against her mother's shoulder, her tiny pink boots dripping onto the welcome mat I'd bought years ago when my wife, Carol, was still alive. I didn't ask another question. I stepped aside. "Get inside, both of you." Emily hesitated. "Dad?" Now, she walked in carrying Lily while I shut the door against the cold. The old furnace kicked on with its familiar rumble, and warm air slowly drifted through the house. It smelled faintly of coffee and cinnamon because I'd baked a batch of snickerdoodles that afternoon. Carol used to make them every December, and after she passed away, I kept the tradition alive. Lily's little hands were almost purple from the cold. I knelt beside her. "Hey there, sweetheart." She looked up at me. "Hi, Grandpa." Her lips trembled. "Let's get these wet clothes off, okay?" She nodded without saying another word. I wrapped her in one of the thick quilts Carol had sewn years earlier and carried her to the couch near the fireplace. Emily stood frozen in the middle of the living room, still wearing her soaked coat as if she wasn't sure she belonged there. "Emily," she looked at me. "Take your coat off." That was all it took. She started crying. Not loud. Not dramatically. Just quiet tears she'd been holding back for too long. I put water on for hot chocolate while she changed into one of Carol's old sweatshirts that she'd always loved borrowing whenever she visited. A few minutes later, Lily had fallen asleep curled against the armrest, clutching a stuffed rabbit she'd managed to grab before leaving the house. Emily stared into her mug for nearly 5 minutes before she finally spoke. "It happened so fast." I waited. People tell the truth when nobody rushes them. "It started after dinner." She rubbed both hands around the warm mug. "Derek said someone was coming over. I figured maybe a coworker, maybe one of his friends. Instead, a woman walked in carrying an overnight bag. She smiled at me." Emily stopped talking. She swallowed hard. She actually smiled. "What did Derek say?" "He said, 'Emily, this is Claire.'" She laughed once. A dry little laugh with no humor in it. I thought he was joking. I could picture my son-in-law standing there with that smug grin he sometimes wore when he thought he was the smartest person in the room. Emily continued. "Then his mother walked into the kitchen. Nancy Collins." Even saying her name in my head tightened something in my chest. Emily took another sip before continuing. She looked at Claire, then looked at me and said, "You should probably start packing before it gets too late." "What did you say?" I laughed again. She shook her head. I honestly thought they were trying some kind of terrible joke. But nobody laughed. The room fell quiet except for the ticking grandfather clock near the dining room. Nancy disappeared upstairs. A minute later, she came back carrying black contractor trash bags. She started folding my clothes. Emily's voice cracked. "My sweaters, Lily's pajamas, our Christmas decorations." She looked toward the sleeping little girl. "You know the ornaments Lily made at preschool?" I nodded. "Nancy took those down, too." I closed my eyes for a moment. Carol had always said Christmas ornaments carried memories better than photographs. Apparently, Nancy didn't care. Emily wiped her face. I asked Derek if he'd lost his mind. He said Claire was moving in. "When?" "After Christmas?" Emily looked at me. Then he smiled. "Actually, why wait?" I felt something twist deep inside me. Not rage. Not yet. Just disbelief. He unplugged the Christmas tree. Emily whispered the words as though she still couldn't believe they'd happened. The lights went dark. Lily asked why Daddy turned Christmas off. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, I asked, "What did Claire do?" "Nothing." She just stood there, like she was waiting for a hotel room to be cleaned. Emily stared at the floor. Nancy packed almost everything. My clothes. Lily's toys. Our bathroom stuff. She laughed bitterly. She even folded my winter scarf. I could almost hear Carol saying, "Some people mistake cruelty for strength." Emily took a deep breath. When I refused to leave, Derek picked up the trash bags. He carried them outside. Then Nancy brought Lily's coat. Snow had already started falling hard. Emily looked toward the front window of my house where flakes still drifted beneath the porch light. Lily asked if we were going somewhere fun. I couldn't answer. Derek opened the front door. The wind blew snow right into the hallway. He put the bags on the porch. I was still standing there. He said, She stopped. I waited. He said, Claire deserves a fresh start. My jaw tightened. And then, he held the door open. I picked up Lily. I walked outside. She looked at me with tears filling her eyes again. And he locked the deadbolt before I even reached the sidewalk. I stared into the fire. Lily turned over in her sleep and softly mumbled something I couldn't make out. Emily whispered one last thing. She knocked on the door. Just once. Daddy. He never answered. For a long moment, nobody spoke. The furnace cycled off, leaving the house strangely quiet. I stood up, grabbed my truck keys, and walked toward the garage. Emily hurried after me. Dad, where are you going? I opened the driver's door but didn't get in. I don't know. And that was the truth. Part of me wanted to drive straight to Derek's house. Part of me wanted to drag him outside and let him feel the same cold he'd forced my family to endure. Instead, I drove aimlessly through Fort Wayne until I found myself in the empty parking lot of the little church Carol and I had attended for over 30 years. Snow covered the stained glass windows. I shut off the engine. For 10 minutes, I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my hands hurt. Then I heard Carol's voice the way I always did when I was about to make a mistake. If anger makes the first decision, regret usually makes the last one. I leaned my forehead against the wheel. By the time I drove home, the sky in the east was beginning to turn gray. Emily and Lily were asleep. I made a fresh pot of coffee and sat alone at the kitchen table until sunrise. I wasn't planning revenge. I was planning protection. And one thought refused to leave my mind. Derek had acted far too confident. He behaved like he already owned that house. If he believed that, then someone had lied to him. Or someone had broken the law. The Monday after Emily and Lily moved into my house, life settled into a strange routine. Emily took a leave of absence from teaching 4th grade at Maple Creek Elementary. She told the principal she needed a couple of weeks to deal with a family emergency. Thankfully, they'd known her for years and didn't ask many questions. Lily adapted faster than the adults did. Kids are funny that way. Within a few days, she'd claimed my recliner as Grandpa's reading chair, lined up stuffed animals across my couch, and informed me that my guest bedroom was now our room. It should have made me smile. Instead, it reminded me why they were there in the first place. One morning, I found Emily standing in front of my kitchen window before sunrise. She was holding a mug of coffee but hadn't taken a sip. You haven't slept much, she shrugged. I keep thinking I'll wake up at home. Then she looked at me. Maybe I should have seen it coming. I walked over and rested a hand on her shoulder. No, I should have. She frowned. Dad, I like Derek. I said it because it was true. The man who married my daughter wasn't some drifter. He worked as a regional sales manager for a building supply company. He wore pressed shirts, coached Little League during the summers, and remembered birthdays. At least that's what I thought. Looking back, there had been signs. Small ones. He never liked it when Emily handled the family finances. He always insisted on opening the mail. Whenever she asked questions about money, he'd say, I've got it covered. At the time, it sounded responsible. Now it sounded controlling. That afternoon, instead of calling an attorney right away, I made one phone call. Harold Benson answered on the second ring. Jack Morgan. Still alive? He laughed. Barely, you? Need a favor. Harold had retired from Allen County Title almost 3 years earlier. We'd met decades ago when I installed a new heating system in his office building. Over the years, we'd stayed in touch, mostly through coffee at a diner on Coldwater Road every few months. What kind of favor? I need to know who owns my daughter's house. He grew quiet. Come see me. An hour later, I pulled into the parking lot outside a little breakfast place where half the customers looked retired. Harold was already there. Same gray beard. Same wire-rimmed glasses. Same habit of stirring his coffee long after the sugar had dissolved. After we ordered breakfast, I told him everything. He listened without interrupting. When I finished, he reached into his briefcase and pulled out a legal pad. "Give me the address." He disappeared for about 15 minutes to make a few phone calls. When he came back, his expression had changed. "The deed hasn't changed." "What do you mean?" "I mean, Emily is still listed as a legal owner." I leaned forward. "So Derek can't throw her out?" Harold shook his head. "Not legally." He lowered his voice. "If what Emily told you is accurate, that wasn't just cruel. It may have been an illegal eviction." For the first time since that snowy night, I felt something besides anger. Hope. Not because things were getting easier. Because facts don't care who tells the loudest story. Harold tapped the table. "Jack, either your son-in-law doesn't understand the law, or he thinks nobody else does." On the drive home, I called Emily. "Don't sign anything." "I wasn't planning to. If Derek asks, don't answer." She paused. "He already has." "What?" "He texted me yesterday." "What did he say?" She pulled up the messages and read them aloud. "Let's make this easy. You know the house is mine. If you cooperate, I'll let you take your clothes." Then another message. "Lawyers will only make this expensive." I actually laughed. Emily sounded surprised. "What's funny?" "He's nervous." "No, he sounds confident." "That's exactly why. People who truly hold all the cards rarely announce it." I spent the next week gathering paperwork. Mortgage statements Emily still had. Tax returns. Insurance documents. Bank notices she'd never bothered opening because Derek always handled the bills. One evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Emily spread everything across my dining room table. I feel stupid. I looked up from the paperwork. "For trusting my husband. You trusted your marriage. There's a difference." She stared at one unopened envelope. "I don't even know what half this stuff means." "You don't have to. That's why we'll hire someone who does." The following morning, we met with Sandra Whitaker, a family law attorney downtown. She was probably in her late 50s. No nonsense. No dramatic promises. She listened for nearly an hour before asking her first question. "Mrs. Collins," Emily interrupted softly. "I'm using Morgan again." Sandra smiled. "Fair enough." Then she looked at both of us. "I need complete honesty. If there's anything embarrassing, tell me now." Emily nodded. "There isn't." Sandra began reviewing the documents. Every few minutes she'd make another note. Finally she stopped. "This mortgage balance doesn't make sense." She compared two statements. "Did you refinance?" Emily blinked. "No." Sandra frowned. "The loan amount increased." Emily looked confused. "I've never signed refinance papers." Sandra became very still. "Are you absolutely certain?" "Yes." The attorney turned one document toward us. Near the bottom was Emily's signature, or at least something pretending to be her signature. Emily stared at it. "I didn't write that." Sandra nodded slowly. "I didn't think you did." She reached for another file. "Mr. Morgan, has your daughter ever reported identity theft?" "No." "She may need to." The room suddenly felt smaller. Sandra explained that forged mortgage documents weren't just a divorce issue. If proven, they could become criminal. She didn't sound excited. She sounded concerned. "We need certified copies. We'll need handwriting experts. And we need to move carefully." Driving home, my phone buzzed. Derek. I almost ignored it. Instead, I answered. "What?" His voice carried that same smug confidence I'd always hated. "You need to tell Emily to stop wasting everyone's time." "I'm not telling her anything." "You don't understand." "No, I understand perfectly." He laughed. "She's got no chance." I looked out the windshield at the gray Indiana sky. "You sure about that?" "I know what I own." After he hung up, I sat in my truck for several minutes. Every instinct told me to drive straight to his office, to look him in the eye, to ask him how he'd become this kind of man. Instead, I drove home, made a fresh pot of coffee, and started organizing every document by date. Carol used to tell me that complicated problems become manageable once you stop looking at them all at once. One page, One phone call. One fact at a time. 3 days later, Sandra called. Jack, you should sit down. What is it? The bank located another refinance document. My stomach tightened. There was a witness. Who? Silence. Then she answered, Nancy Collins. I closed my eyes. The mother hadn't just encouraged what happened. She might have helped make it possible. And suddenly, the night Emily had been thrown into the snow looked less like an emotional outburst, and more like the final step in a plan that had been unfolding for months. Christmas Eve arrived wearing 6 inches of fresh snow. The neighborhood looked like one of those holiday cards Carol used to buy every December. White rooftops, smoke drifting from chimneys, wreaths hanging on front doors. From the outside, everything looked peaceful. Inside my house, it was a different story. Lily stood by the living room window in her little red pajamas, watching snowflakes drift past the glass. Grandpa? Yes, sweetheart. Will Santa know I live here now? I smiled. He'll find you. How? I knelt beside her. Santa's been doing this a long time. He's older than Grandpa. That earned me a tiny giggle. I didn't know anybody was older than you. Emily laughed for the first time in days. It wasn't much, but it sounded like hope. We tried to make Christmas feel normal. Emily baked sugar cookies from Carol's recipe. Lily insisted on decorating them with so many sprinkles they barely looked like cookies anymore. Christmas music played softly from the old radio in my kitchen. For a few hours. Life almost felt familiar. Then Emily's phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen, immediately locked it again. What is it? Nothing. It wasn't nothing. She hesitated. Nancy posted Christmas pictures. Emily handed me the phone. There they were. Derek, Nancy, Claire, standing in front of Emily's Christmas tree. The one she'd spent an entire Saturday decorating with Lily. Claire wore the green sweater Emily's sister had given her 2 Christmases earlier. Nancy had written, Nothing is better than spending Christmas with the people who truly belong together. Nearly 200 people had liked it. Someone had commented, Beautiful family. My jaw tightened. Emily quietly took the phone back. I should never have looked. She walked into the hallway before I could say anything. A few seconds later, I heard her crying. Not loudly, just enough for a father to know his daughter was trying not to be heard. Later that afternoon, while Lily played on the floor with her coloring books, she suddenly looked around the room. My bunny? Emily stopped wrapping presents. What bunny? My bedtime bunny. The stuffed rabbit. We both froze. Emily looked toward me. I think, she swallowed. I think we left it. Lily's little face crumpled. I can't sleep without Bunny. Emily immediately stood. I'll go. No. I reached for my coat. I'll take care of it. Dad, you don't have to. I know, but I will. Wait. The drive across Fort Wayne took about 20 minutes. Christmas lights glowed in nearly every neighborhood. People carried wrapped gifts into warm houses. Families gathered around dinner tables. I wondered how many of them knew how lucky they were. Derek's house was brighter than I'd ever seen it. Cars lined both sides of the street. I counted at least 9. So, the whole Collins family was celebrating. I parked half a block away, sat quietly for a minute, then picked up Lily's spare stuffed rabbit I'd bought years ago. Not because I expected to leave with the original, because I knew she'd need something if I couldn't. As I walked toward the front porch, I could hear laughter inside. Someone was singing along with Christmas music. I knocked. The laughter stopped. Nancy opened the door. For a moment, she looked genuinely surprised. Then she smiled. Not kindly. The kind of smile people wear when they think they've already won. Well, Merry Christmas. I'd like Lily's rabbit. Nancy leaned against the doorframe. I don't know what you're talking about. Before I could answer, Derek appeared behind her. What's going on? He saw me. His smile disappeared. What do you want? Lily left her stuffed rabbit. He shrugged. So? So she's 3. And she'd like it back. Claire appeared in the hallway. She looked uncomfortable. Very different from the woman Emily had described that first night. She wasn't smiling anymore. She quietly asked Derek, "Is that her dad?" He ignored her. Nancy folded her arms. "I think you people have enough already. You've been living in your little pity party for almost 2 weeks." I looked directly at her. "It's Christmas Eve. I'm asking for a child's toy." She opened her mouth to argue. Instead, a little boy, probably one of Derek's nephews, ran through the hallway holding Lily's stuffed rabbit. My heart sank. It was dirty. One ear had nearly been torn off. The boy tossed it across the room like a football. "It smells funny." Claire looked horrified. She picked it up, carefully brushed it off, then walked over and handed it to me without saying a word. "Thank you," I told her. She nodded quietly. Behind her, Derek rolled his eyes. "Can we be done now?" I tucked the rabbit inside my coat. Then I looked at every adult standing in that hallway. There must have been 15 people watching. Some avoided eye contact. Others looked embarrassed. Nobody defended what had happened. Finally, Nancy laughed. "So, you've accepted reality." I smiled. Not because anything was funny, because I suddenly understood something. People who humiliate others in private almost always expect applause in public. "No," I said it calmly. "I've simply learned something." "What?" "The truth usually arrives later than the lie." Nobody spoke. Even Derek looked confused. I tipped my head politely. "Merry Christmas." Then I walked away. No speeches. No threats. No shouting. Halfway down the driveway, I heard laughter behind me. Someone joked that I'd finally given up. Someone else said Emily should have signed the papers weeks ago. I never turned around. Back home, Lily hugged the rabbit so tightly I thought she might never let go. "It came home." It sure did. Emily examined the torn ear. Her eyes filled with tears again. "They let kids play with it." I nodded. She quietly stitched the ear back together while Lily watched cartoons. That tiny repair somehow broke my heart more than anything else that week. 3 days later, on December 27th, I was replacing a burned-out light bulb in my garage when my phone rang. It was Sandra. "You need to come to my office." "Good news?" "I think so." An hour later, she placed 2 certified envelopes on her desk. One came from the mortgage company, the other from the county prosecutor. I stared at them. What happened? The bank completed its preliminary review. And? They found enough irregularities to begin a formal fraud investigation. Before I could answer, Sandra slid another document toward me. "There is something else." She paused. "We subpoenaed Claire." I looked up. She agreed? Not exactly. Sandra folded her hands. She hired an attorney. Good. Her attorney requested copies of the mortgage documents. "So?" Sandra gave me a long look. "Apparently Derek told Claire he was already divorced." I blinked. "He wasn't." Sandra almost smiled. "He hadn't even filed." For the first time, I realized Derek hadn't only betrayed Emily. He'd built his entire new life on lies. And once one lie started falling apart, the others wouldn't stay standing for very long. By the time January rolled into February, I had learned something I wish I'd never needed to know. Justice has a lot of paperwork. Television makes it look like one dramatic courtroom speech changes everything. Real life doesn't work that way. Real life is phone calls that don't get returned until next Tuesday. It's sitting in waiting rooms with stale coffee. It's signing your name on document after document until your hand cramps. It's paying attorney invoices that make your stomach tighten. And it's waking up every morning hoping nobody has given up. Those months tested all of us. Emily started seeing a therapist every Wednesday afternoon. At first, she didn't want to. "I don't need therapy," she told me one evening while we cleaned up after dinner. "I need my life back." I handed her another plate to dry. Sometimes those two things help each other. She looked down at the dish towel. "I hate that he still gets to affect me." I nodded. "So do I. But pretending you're fine won't make him smaller." A few weeks later, she admitted the sessions were helping. Not because they erased what happened. Because they helped her stop blaming herself. That mattered. Lily had her own way of dealing with things. The first time I accidentally slammed the front door after carrying in groceries, she screamed. Not cried. Screamed. She dropped the coloring book she'd been holding and ran straight under the dining room table. Emily rushed over. Lily, it's okay. No answer. Emily crawled underneath with her. I stayed where I was. Sometimes children need their parent more than their grandparent. After several minutes, I heard Lily whisper something. Emily looked up at me with tears in her eyes. She thought somebody was making us leave again. I walked outside before either of them could see my face. The cold February air hit me hard. I stood on the porch for a long time. A 3-year-old shouldn't be afraid of a closing door. The legal process crawled forward. Sandra called almost every week with another update, or another delay. Usually both. One Tuesday afternoon, she invited Emily and me into her office. I want to prepare you for something. Neither of us liked the sound of that. Derek retained new counsel. What does that mean? Emily asked. It means he hired someone very experienced. Sandra slid a business card across the desk. I recognized the name immediately. Michael Grayson, one of the better-known civil attorneys in Fort Wayne. He isn't cheap, I said. No, Sandra folded her hands. And he's good. Emily's shoulders dropped. So, we're going to lose? Sandra answered before I could. No, but this won't be easy anymore. She was right. Within 2 weeks, everything became more complicated. Grayson's strategy was simple. Emily had signed the documents voluntarily. If she didn't remember, that wasn't Derek's fault. He argued she'd simply forgotten. Then he suggested she hadn't paid attention to her own finances. Reading those claims made my blood boil. Emily looked devastated. People are actually going to believe this. I reached across the table and squeezed her hand. Some might, but evidence isn't a popularity contest. The problem was, at that point, we still didn't have enough. The handwriting expert believed the signature was forged. Believed, not proved. The bank suspected fraud. Suspected, not confirmed. Sandra remained calm. Cases like this are won with patience. I smiled weakly. I was hoping you'd say something easier. She laughed. I know. A few days later, I almost ruined everything. I was at Miller's grocery picking up milk and dog food when I spotted Derek. He was standing near the checkout lanes laughing with another man, like nothing had happened. Like Emily hadn't spent weeks waking up in tears. Like Lily wasn't still afraid of locked doors. He saw me, smirked, actually smirked. Then he gave me a little wave. I don't remember pushing my cart. 1 second I was in the frozen food aisle. The next I was standing 10 feet from him. He looked amused. Jack. I didn't answer. You doing okay? Still smiling. I took another step. For one dangerous moment, I imagined grabbing him by that expensive winter coat, asking him what kind of father throws his own child into the snow. Instead, I heard Carol again. Not in some magical way. Just the memory of something she'd once told me after a difficult customer screamed at me decades earlier. The second you lose control, you hand control to them. I turned around. Left my shopping cart exactly where it was. Walked out. My hands shook the entire drive home. That night I confessed everything to Emily. I almost hit him. She looked at me for a long moment. Then she quietly said, I'm glad you didn't. So am I. March arrived with muddy streets and patches of dirty snow melting into the gutters. One afternoon, Sandra called. Can you come in? Her voice sounded different. Not worried. Curious. When Emily and I reached her office, another woman was sitting in the conference room. She stood as we entered. It took me a second to recognize her. Claire. She looked exhausted. No makeup. Hair pulled back. Nothing like the woman smiling in those Christmas photos. Her attorney sat beside her. Claire looked directly at Emily. I'm sorry. Emily didn't respond. Claire nodded as if she'd expected that. Then she opened a large envelope. I brought everything. Bank transfers, credit card statements, text messages, emails, even printed screenshots of conversations. Sandra slowly began sorting through them. The room grew quieter with every page. Claire finally spoke again. I didn't come because I suddenly became a good person. Nobody argued. I came because I found out he'd been lying to me too. She took a slow breath. He told me he was divorced. He told me the refinance money came from selling investment property. She looked down. I believed him. Her attorney spoke next. My client is cooperating fully. She wants it understood she received no legal advice from Mr. Collins regarding those financial transactions. Sandra nodded. I appreciate that. Claire turned back toward Emily. I should have asked more questions. Emily finally answered. Yes. You should have. There wasn't any yelling. No dramatic confrontation. Just two women sitting across from each other. One carrying fresh wounds. The other carrying regret. You may. 3 days later, Sandra called again. This time, she didn't bother with small talk. They issued the warrant. I sat down at my kitchen table. What charges? The prosecutor approved mortgage fraud and forgery counts. I closed my eyes. Months of waiting. Months of doubt. Months of wondering whether the truth would ever matter. And now, it finally did. That evening, just after dinner, my phone rang. Emily's name flashed across the screen. I answered immediately. Dad! She was crying. Different tears this time. They arrested him. Outside my kitchen window, the first robins of spring had returned. For the first time since that bitter December night, it felt like winter was finally beginning to let go. By early May, the trees around Fort Wayne had finally turned green again. The snow was gone. The bitter cold had been replaced by warm mornings and the smell of freshly cut grass. It amazed me how the world could move on while people were still trying to put themselves back together. The criminal case and the divorce proceedings had become two separate tracks. Derek's attorney fought hard on every issue, but once the handwriting experts, bank investigators, and digital records were brought together, the facts painted a picture that was hard to argue with. Still, Sandra reminded us not to celebrate too early. Evidence wins cases, she said. Confidence doesn't. The hearing on temporary property, custody, and financial issues was scheduled for a Tuesday morning at the Allen County Courthouse. Emily barely slept the night before. Around 6 that morning, I found her sitting on my back porch with a blanket wrapped around her shoulders. She stared into the yard where Lily's little plastic tricycle sat near the garden. What if I freeze? She asked. You won't. What if I forget something? You won't. What if they make me sound like I'm crazy? I sat beside her. They're going to ask questions. Just answer them. You don't need to be perfect. You only need to tell the truth. She looked over at me. I wish Mom were here. I swallowed. So do I. We sat quietly for another minute before I smiled. But knowing your mother, Emily laughed softly through her tears. She'd probably tell us both to stop worrying and eat breakfast. That sounds exactly like her. Nah. The courthouse parking garage was already filling when we arrived. People hurried toward the entrance carrying briefcases and coffee cups. Some looked nervous. Some looked angry. Others simply looked tired. Family court isn't a place where many people arrive on the best day of their lives. Inside, security took our phones through the scanner. The hallway outside the courtroom buzzed with quiet conversations. Then I saw them. Nancy stood near the window wearing a navy blue suit and enough perfume that I could smell it from 15 feet away. She folded her arms the moment she spotted us. Derek stood beside his attorney. He looked thinner. His expensive watch was gone. So was the confidence I'd seen at the grocery store. For a moment our eyes met. He looked away first. That told me more than words ever could. Court began promptly at 9. The judge entered. Everyone stood. Within minutes, the room settled into the steady rhythm of testimony, documents, and legal arguments. Sandra presented the timeline carefully. No theatrics, just facts. Property records, mortgage documents, bank statements, phone records, emails, certified handwriting analysis. Every piece fit together like another section of a puzzle. Grayson challenged everything he reasonably could. He questioned dates, procedures, memory. But facts have a stubborn habit of surviving cross-examination. Then Emily took the witness stand. I had never been prouder of my daughter. She didn't try to sound dramatic. She didn't exaggerate. She simply answered each question honestly. Sandra asked gently, "What happened on December 12th? Emily took a slow breath. My husband introduced another woman inside our home. What happened next? My mother-in-law packed our belongings into trash bags. And then? My husband locked the front door behind us. Sandra paused. Who was with you? My daughter. How old was she? 3. The courtroom became very quiet. What did Lily do? Emily looked down for a second. She knocked on the door. What did she say? Emily's voice almost disappeared. Daddy? There wasn't another question for several seconds. You could hear someone shift in the back row. A clerk quietly cleared her throat. Even Judge Martinez removed his glasses for a moment. No lawyer could improve on that silence. Later that afternoon, Claire testified. She wasn't there because she wanted revenge. She wasn't there because she'd become friends with Emily. She was there because she'd learned she'd been deceived as well. Her attorney had negotiated limited immunity regarding financial matters, in which investigators concluded she had unknowingly participated. Sandra asked, "What did Mr. Collins tell you before you moved into the home?" Claire answered clearly. "He told me he was divorced." "Were divorce papers filed at that time?" "No." "Did you know Mrs. Collins remained a legal owner of the property?" "No." "Did you know refinance documents contained a forged signature?" "No." Grayson tried to suggest Claire was changing her story to protect herself. She didn't argue. She simply answered every question. "No. I didn't know. I should have asked. I didn't. It wasn't dramatic. It sounded like someone admitting a mistake." Ironically, that made her more believable. "No." Then Nancy decided to speak. Nobody had asked her to. She leaned forward from her seat and interrupted Sandra during questioning. "This is ridiculous." Judge Martinez looked over his glasses. "Mrs. Collins, you'll have an opportunity if one becomes appropriate." She ignored him. "My son worked for everything he had." Another interruption. The judge's voice stayed calm. "Mrs. Collins, if you interrupt again, you'll be removed from this courtroom." She finally sat down, but she couldn't hide the anger on her face. For the first time since I'd known her, she wasn't controlling the room. The room had moved on without her. By late afternoon, the judge delivered several temporary rulings. Emily received primary residential custody while the case continued. She was granted exclusive possession of the marital home pending final property division. Derek was ordered to continue financial support under the court's temporary orders. The judge also noted the serious evidence surrounding the mortgage fraud allegations, explaining that those matters would continue separately through the criminal process. It wasn't the end of everything, but it was a major step. More importantly, Emily no longer had to wonder whether anyone believed her. The court did. Outside the courthouse, local reporters waited near the steps. The criminal investigation had attracted more attention than most divorce cases. Microphones appeared almost immediately. One reporter approached Nancy. "Mrs. Collins, do you have any comment regarding today's ruling?" She pointed straight at me. "This old man destroyed our family." Several cameras turned toward me. For a second, I considered saying nothing. Then I remembered Lily standing in the snow. I stepped forward just enough to answer. "No." I kept my voice calm. "You destroyed your own family the night you locked your granddaughter outside in the middle of winter." Nobody interrupted. Nobody defended her. Even the reporters stayed silent for a moment before lowering their microphones. Nancy opened her mouth as if she wanted to argue. Nothing came out. Wow. Over the next few weeks, things changed quietly. Emily smiled more often. She returned to teaching part-time. Lily stopped asking whether she had to leave Grandpa's house. Then one Friday afternoon, as I finished planting tomatoes in my backyard, I noticed an old pickup slowly turning into my driveway. I recognized the driver immediately. Derek. He parked, turned off the engine, and for nearly a full minute, he just sat there. When he finally stepped out, he was alone. No lawyer, no mother, no audience. I had no idea why he'd come. But something told me this conversation would be very different from everyone we'd had before. For a long moment, Derek just stood beside his truck. The afternoon sun was warm, the kind of Indiana spring day that makes you forget how brutal winter can be. My tomato plants had finally taken root. Lily's little pink watering can sat beside the garden bed, half full because she'd insisted on helping Grandpa. Life had begun to feel ordinary again. I'd learned not to take ordinary for granted. Derek walked toward me slowly. He looked older than I remembered. Not because of gray hair, because of everything else. The expensive clothes were gone. Instead of polished dress shoes, he wore worn work boots. His shoulders slumped in a way I'd never seen before. Jack. I set my trowel down. Derek. Neither of us spoke for several seconds. Finally, he nodded toward the backyard. You've always kept this place nice. I try. Another silence. Then he said the last thing I expected. I don't know how to start. You just did. He let out a tired breath. I've practiced this conversation 100 times. I believe you. But every version sounded selfish. I crossed my arms. So don't make it about yourself. He nodded. Fair enough. He looked down at the grass before meeting my eyes again. I became someone I wouldn't have respected 10 years ago. I didn't answer. He continued. I kept telling myself I deserved to be happy. Then I convinced myself Emily would be fine. Then I started believing my own lies. He shook his head. I even convinced myself Lily was too young to remember. I looked toward the swing set I'd put together during the winter. She remembers more than you think. His face fell. I know. The therapist told me. That caught my attention. You're seeing a therapist? I started after my attorney suggested it. He gave a humorless laugh. At first, I thought it was just to help my case. But somewhere along the way, I realized I needed it. For the first time since all of this had begun, I saw something that hadn't been there before. Not fear. Not arrogance. Shame. Real shame. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. I wrote this. I don't expect you to read it now. It's for Emily. I took it but didn't unfold it. She'll decide whether she wants to. I know. And if she tears it up, I'll understand. He looked around the yard again. I drove past here 3 times before I worked up the nerve to come in. I figured. You saw me? I saw the truck. He smiled weakly. You always notice everything. No. I've just had a lot of practice. We both knew that wasn't entirely true. Age teaches you to pay attention. Sometimes that's a gift. Sometimes it's a burden. Derek rubbed the back of his neck. I lost my job. I heard. My company said the fraud charges and publicity damaged their reputation. I nodded once. He wasn't asking for sympathy. He was stating a fact. Claire left. I heard that too. She moved back to Michigan. Again, just facts. No bitterness in his voice. Only acceptance. My mother still says none of this would have happened if you hadn't gotten involved. I couldn't help smiling. And what do you think? He looked straight at me. I think she has to believe that. Because admitting the truth would mean admitting she helped destroy her own family. That was probably the most honest thing I'd ever heard him say. A breeze moved through the maple tree in my backyard. Somewhere down the street, a lawnmower started up. Life kept moving. It always does. Derek cleared his throat. I came for one more reason. I waited. I want to be a better father. Not because a judge ordered visitation. Not because my lawyer told me it looks good. Because every night, he paused. I keep hearing Lily knocking on that front door. He closed his eyes. And I know she'll hear that sound for the rest of her life. Neither of us spoke. There wasn't anything I could add to that. Finally, I said, you can't change that night. I know. But you can decide whether it becomes the worst thing she remembers about you. He looked at me carefully. What do you mean? You spend the next 10 years showing up. You don't miss birthdays. You don't cancel weekends because something more interesting comes along. You tell the truth. You pay your support without complaining. You become someone she can count on. I stepped closer. You stopped being my son-in-law months ago. That chapter is over. But you'll always be Lily's father. What kind of father you become from here? That's still your decision. His eyes filled with tears. He nodded once. Thank you. I wasn't thanking you. I was giving you responsibility. I know. He held out his hand. For a second, I looked at it. Months earlier, I would have refused. Now, I shook it. Not because everything was forgiven, because hatred had already taken enough from all of us. He climbed back into his truck. Before starting the engine, he rolled the window down. I'll spend the rest of my life wishing I could take that night back. I believe you. But wishing isn't the same as changing. No, it isn't. Then he drove away. I watched until the truck disappeared around the corner. A few minutes later, the back door opened. Lily came running outside wearing little gardening gloves that were much too big for her hands. Grandpa! She carried a packet of sunflower seeds. Can we plant these? We sure can. Emily followed her onto the porch with 2 glasses of iced tea. She looked at the empty driveway. Was that Derek? Yeah. What did he want? I thought about everything we'd talked about. He wanted a second chance. Emily didn't ask whether I'd given him one. She already understood. Second chances aren't gifts that other people hand you. They're opportunities you earn. Over the summer, little by little, life settled into a new rhythm. Emily finalized the divorce. The marital home was eventually sold under court supervision, and after debts were sorted out according to the legal process, she received her rightful share. She used part of it as the down payment on a modest townhouse just 15 minutes from mine. She went back to teaching full-time that August. Her students adored her. Lily started preschool. The nightmares became less frequent. Eventually, they stopped. On weekends, she still came over to help me in the garden. The tomatoes turned red. The sunflowers grew taller than she was. One Saturday, she rode her bicycle down my driveway without training wheels for the very first time. She looked back over her shoulder. Grandpa, I did it! I laughed so hard my eyes watered. For months, I'd imagined victory as a courtroom ruling, or an arrest, or watching Derek finally face consequences. I was wrong. This was victory. A little girl laughing in the sunshine without fear. A daughter who smiled because she finally believed tomorrow could be better than yesterday. Growing older has taught me something I wish more people understood. Real revenge isn't about ruining someone's life. It's about refusing to let the people you love keep living under someone else's cruelty. Justice gave my daughter her rights back. Time gave her peace. And seeing my granddaughter laugh again was worth more than any courtroom victory could ever be. If you've ever had to stand between your family and someone who crossed the line, I'd love to hear your story. Thank you for spending this time with me. I hope you and the people you love always find your way back to peace.